What if we forgot how to heal? What if hospitals 100 years ago understood something about healing that we've almost completely forgotten? I've spent more than 25 years in medicine, and for the last 17 years, I've worked in and pioneered my own approach to bioelectric medicine. And over those years, I've come to believe something that is actually very simple. Our bodies were created to heal. That doesn't mean they always can heal without help. Obviously, they can't. There are many reasons our bodies struggle today. Chronic inflammation, and over generations, we have just added to this inflammation to the point now we're laden with inflammation, which is why people are walking around sick, unwell, in pain, and just not feeling tip-top or 100%. And now, that much inflammation is hard to get out of the body. Again, this is why even things Western medicine are doing can't help much. We have illness, we have injury, stressors, environmental exposures, which are getting worse. We have poor nutrition and poor food quality, which is getting worse. And sometimes simply all of this is too much for the body to overcome on its own. And when I say the body was created to heal itself, I am absolutely not saying we don't need modern medicine. We do. I came from Western medicine. I'm incredibly grateful for the advances we've made. Think about what we're capable of doing surgically today. Back in my early days of working in surgery in the early 80s, we did not have the ability to use robotic type instruments, and even doing laparoscopic procedures was very new. I remember in the early 80s when they brought into the OR a laparoscopic instrument, and I remember thinking, what? This is not going to work at all. And I mean, that's just how little I thought bigger than I should have. And this is what I mean. We still have people in medicine that are very smart who can't open their minds past what they've been taught in their medical training. And that's a problem, I think, a big problem. But laparoscopy existed early, especially in gynecology, but operative laparoscopy in general surgery was new in the 1980s. The first laparoscopic appendectomy was in 1983. Laparoscopic gallbladder surgery, which was a little more complicated, emerged in the mid to late 80s. And it really exploded into general surgical practice around 1989 to 90. But I remember those early years, and I just thought, this is weird. It's not going to work. But now, think about how it's going with trauma medicine or anesthesia, imaging, transplantation, emergency medicine, cardiovascular surgery. The changes are incredible. My brother was born in 1951, and he had a very complicated congenital heart defect. Now, my parents were in Alaska, and my mother, maybe she was 21, I don't know exactly, but she would have to fly to Johns Hopkins with this very sick little boy. And he was working with the doctors Taussig and Blaylock, who were instrumental in starting open heart surgery. Those were his doctors, and they couldn't help him much. And then in 1957, he died. And 2 years later, they began working with open heart surgery and starting that whole procedure. I mean, it's crazy to think about. 2 years after my brother died, there was so much more they might have been able to do for him. Although even cardiovascular surgery, that was a long process of getting to where we are today. But now we use the scope in cardiovascular surgery, and the illness that my brother had is a 90-minute procedure to correct today. It's extraordinary, I think. So I believe our ability to think outside the box, to research, invent, question, and discover was also given to us. I'm enormously grateful for scientists and physicians who continue to do exactly that and stay open-minded. I'm very open-minded. I might be a cynic at first and very skeptical, but I always do the research, and I am always able to come back and say if I was wrong about something. But it took me a while after I started practicing bioelectric medicine to begin digging much deeper into the science and into medicine's past. So I started asking, in our pursuit of newer and more advanced medicine, did we leave some important things behind? Because if you go back and look at hospitals and healing environments from more than a century ago, some of what they incorporated into patient care is fascinating, and we still need to use those things. Copper. Let's start with copper. Copper vessels and objects have been used for centuries, and today we understand something our ancestors couldn't explain at a cellular level. Copper is naturally antimicrobial. Copper ions can damage bacterial membranes of cells and interfere with those essential cellular processes. Modern researchers have even studied copper surfaces in hospitals because of their ability to reduce microbial contamination. But copper fascinates me for another reason. Copper is an extraordinary electrical conductor. And if you've listened to me for any length of time, you know where I'm going with this. We are electrical beings. The heart's electrical, the brain and nervous system depend upon electrical activity. Every living cell maintains an electrical potential across its membrane. And I want to just mention cancer cells because this is my opinion only. Cancer cells, I believe, have a low electrical potential, and I believe with the bioelectric medicine that we can increase that electrical potential and potentially make those cells neutral, maybe healthy. But my goal is somebody out there will start really researching this and seeing how incredible bioelectric medicine could be for cancer. But again, that is my opinion. Now, our biology isn't simply chemical, it's bioelectrical, and that is why I call what I do bioelectric medicine. Years ago, when I started researching copper, I actually brought it back into my own life. I started drinking from copper vessels, and I still do. I even use copper in my garden. I have these beautiful little decor pieces in the garden, but they actually help the plants grow more prolifically and I think are healthier. Once I began understanding copper differently, I began seeing it differently. And I think copper is something we need to bring back. Linen. Now, this was something as simple as what patients slept on. It was widely used historically, and there's a lot being said today about the supposed frequency of linen. I want to say 5,000 hertz, but I'm not sure if that's correct. But it still doesn't make linen uninteresting. Linen is highly breathable and absorbent. It manages moisture well, dries relatively quickly, and allows heat to dissipate. Think about the environment you're creating around skin and the body of someone who's lying in a bed trying to recover. Sometimes supporting physiology isn't that complicated. And that's something I think we've forgotten. And back in the day, they had sun decks where they were dressed and laying in linen and out in the sun healing. We need to do that again. And I think they do it in Switzerland and maybe some other European countries and places. I'm sure they do. But I don't see that happening here a lot. Now, let's talk a little bit about plants. I do believe we were given everything on this planet to help us heal as well. But back in the 80s, I had friends who were from Ireland, and they were always using herbal medicine. And I just would laugh and think, wow, that's so woo-woo, But that's where I was back then. And I had just started, studying Western medicine. So I was really all in that study. So plants I never thought about, and I never looked at any of the herbal stuff until the last few years. Now, we have herbal medicine for sure. I think a lot of doctors use it. And back in the day, there were doctors using homeopathy, but I won't go into that whole story, but we know what happened. So I want to talk about elderberry, burdock, and dandelion real quickly. Traditionally, dandelion was used for digestion, liver and biliary support, fluid balance, diuresis, and inflammation. It contains polyphenols and other compounds showing antioxidant and anti-inflammatory activity, mostly in the lab and preclinical research. Human evidence is much thinner, so I describe it right now as a supporting physiologic process involved in healing, rather than saying it has been proven to heal a particular disease. And I haven't studied it much more, so I don't know. Maybe that's changed. Burdock contains compounds studied for anti-inflammation, antioxidant abilities, antimicrobial, and hepatoprotective effects for the liver. It also has a long history of traditional medicinal use. Again, much of the mechanistic evidence is preclinical. Elderberry. This is particularly interesting for immune response and viral illness. It's rich in polyphenols, has demonstrated antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, antiviral, and antimicrobial activity. Human studies suggest it may shorten or lessen symptoms of some acute respiratory viral infections. Again, although the clinical evidence is a little limited, that may have changed. I haven't done research this past year on it, though. So, yes, elderberry actually strengthens the point that I'm trying to develop here, because it's a good example of an old medicinal plant for which we're now identifying biochemical mechanisms, rather than simply dismissing traditional use as folklore. Now, there are hundreds of other plants that were used medicinally across cultures long before modern pharmaceuticals existed. And why? Because plants contain biologically active compounds. Now we know that. So that doesn't mean every traditional remedy treats every disease. And it doesn't mean we should dismiss it either, because it comes from nature. Nature has always been chemistry, and some very important modern medicines originated from compounds found in the natural world. And nowadays, I'm much less likely to want to use for myself pharmaceuticals. And there's a huge discussion of this online now, so I will say no more about it. But sunlight, I want to talk about that, because here's one I find very interesting. Hospitals and sanatoriums once deliberately incorporated sunlight and fresh air into patient care. Interesting. There were sundecks and terraces where patients recuperated outdoors. Some facilities were actually designed around access to sunlight. And today we understand much more about why light matters physiologically. UVB exposure allows our skin to synthesize vitamin D. Light entering our eyes helps regulate our circadian system, or circadian rhythm, the biological timing system involved in our sleep, hormones, metabolism, and many other physiological processes. So sunlight doesn't just feel good, it's good for us. Now, there's problems with sun as well, but light is information to the body. And that brings me to something I talk about constantly around bioelectric medicine: signaling. Your body is receiving and interpreting information every second you're alive. Light is information, temperature is information, chemistry is information, touch is information, and electrical current is information, but it has to be the right current. Your cells communicate, your nervous system communicates, muscles communicate with nerves, tissues communicate with one another. Healing itself requires this signaling and communication. And this is where bioelectric medicine completely changed the way I began looking at the human body. So now, besides asking clients questions about an injury or what's going on with them and what's going on in their lives, the biggest question I have now is, what is the body trying to tell me? My original medical training taught me to ask incredibly important questions. What structure is injured? What disease process is occurring? What does imaging show? What treatment affects this particular pathway? I still believe in those questions, but bioelectric medicine taught me to add another one. What is the body trying to tell me? Because we're not only anatomical, we're not only chemical, we are electrical. And over 17 years of working with the body's electrical physiology, I have seen results I never expected when I began. I've had clients come to me after being told, we don't know what's causing this, or there's nothing more we can do for you, good luck. But I've worked with frozen shoulders, Bell's palsy, chronic pain, chronic injuries, sports injuries, and extraordinarily complicated neurologic conditions, including nerve damage and traumatic and congenital conditions. And I've seen amazing changes. Do I believe bioelectric medicine cures everything? No, of course not. But I've watched conditions resolve. I've watched pain change. I've watched function return. I've watched people improve when they had been told there wasn't anything left to do. And with some very complex conditions that couldn't simply be fixed, I've watched quality of life improve. Sometimes the change is physical. Sometimes someone simply says, I feel well again. But after 17 years in this field, I can't ignore what I've witnessed. I don't believe medicine should go backwards. I believe we need Western medicine. I believe there's tremendous knowledge within Eastern medicine, and I believe there's knowledge worth investigating in herbal medicine, homeopathy, Ayurvedic medicine, and obviously, I believe deeply in bioelectric medicine. But this isn't about choosing one and rejecting the others. And I certainly don't want medicine to go backwards. Like I said, I think bioelectric medicine works upstream from Western medicine. And I also find sometimes that some of the practitioners are caught inside the problem instead of stepping out and looking at the body and the whole problem in a bigger way. Because I want our understanding of healing to become bigger. And that's why what is the body showing me is a really important question. When I've done this work, the instruments are on the body. I started seeing, in the early days, I would start seeing areas turn red, the erythema. And I realized, okay, this is where the inflammation is at. And then, this sounds a little crazy, but I started to get pulled with my instruments to areas that the client didn't even know that they had an issue. But then when I would work on that area, all of a sudden they were like, oh yeah, I forgot. I have, something going on there too. So it's almost too good to be true in that sense. But I obviously am not doing imaging here in the studio, yet the body is communicating with me. Now, I know it's a little hard to take in, but trust me on this. My clients will attest to this. So I want us to take the extraordinary advances that we've made in science and medicine and combine them with a deeper understanding of what the human body actually needs to function, communicate, and heal. Now, signaling in the body is something that I don't hear many doctors talk about, but I do believe when things happen, especially, for instance, I had a client who lost unilateral hearing on one side. They did the imaging, there was no tumor, but I knew that the signal had been cut off to that ear. And there were many reasons why, and I won't go into that now. I'll talk about that later. But doing this work helped bring back 50% of the hearing in a very short period of time. So I know I'm onto something when I talk about signaling. Now, personally, I want to add one more very simple practice that I do in my own life: grounding. Now, I think everyone knows what this is, where 10 years ago, not many people did. And I'm a big believer, and I've always been that way around this because I grew up in Alaska. I also grew up around a lot of the natives of Alaska who understood things more than we did, and understood medicinal practices and the earth and current and all of that. And I learned a lot from them. But now I take off my shoes and socks. I walk on grass, on sand, or dirt. You can't walk on cement. And you put your feet directly on the earth. 30 minutes, you can do as long as you want. But I do this at least monthly, and it regrounds our body. And for me, it's another way of remembering that we aren't separate from the electrical environment of this planet. We're part of it. And maybe that's the larger point of all this. We don't have to choose between science and nature. We don't have to choose between ancient knowledge and modern technology. And we don't have to throw away extraordinarily amazing medical advances in order to ask whether we left some valuable things behind. Maybe the future of medicine isn't about choosing between old and new. Maybe it's about being intelligent enough and open enough and curious enough to ask what we should have carried forward with us.